Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be able to be here today. When it was clear that some form of EcoMotion was happening this year, despite everything that's been going on over the last 6 months, my colleague Martin and I made it a priority to make sure to come here. And we're very excited to be able to be here, to be in front of this great audience, in front of this great ecosystem, and be able to talk about one particular effort that we did last year, where we interviewed a ton of investors asking what they actually value in a pitch deck and what they actually value in a company before they actually make an investment decision. Now, maybe 2 or 3 words about the McKinsey Center for Future Mobility. So what is it that we do? We are a group of, by now it's almost 300 people globally actually, that work with different types of companies. So we work a lot with companies from different industries, a lot in the mobility space, automotive space, but also other industries on the future of mobility. For us, the future of mobility is a very broad space. So we work on autonomous driving, we work on shared mobility, we work on micromobility, electric vehicles, charging, batteries, flying things like advanced air mobility and urban air mobility, and many, many different other things. But now to the results of our survey. Now, what did we do? We asked a ton of investors, a ton of VC investors, strategic investors, and also many, many others, a bunch of questions, always the same questions, a combination of a survey and then also some in-depth interviews. And what we came out with is basically that there are 3 key things that investors value most about presentations about companies. And what are those? So one of the very important things is having a clear strategy what to actually do with the money. Doesn't sound like complete, or it sounds a bit like a no-brainer, but having a clear plan how much money is needed, what the money is going to be used for, and not only for the first funding or for the current funding round, but maybe even for funding rounds in the future, is something that is articulated as the one key thing, or the main key thing, if you will, by most investors. We also have 2 other things that come out and stand out as clear topics: defensibility from competition. You could again say, of course, every company needs to show that they have defensibility from competition and that they have a product that is clearly unique, but making the point how in a specific industry, especially when there are very, very broad topics out there, how your specific solution is different, and also how it differentiates and why you think you can actually defend against your competitors. It's very, very important. It's even more important if it's something that is starting to commoditize. So if we think about micromobility and other topics, but we have found that it's also equally important if it's actually, say, a software product in automotive or something along these lines. And then last but not least, and I think that's definitely where the startup community here in Israel has a very, very strong suit, is adaptability. So regardless of what happens outside in the world, what happens to the funding environment, what happens to the economic environment, what happens maybe to the political or geopolitical environment, companies need to be able to show that they're able to adapt to changes outside, changes impacting them. So investors want the teams to flexibly react, make pivots in the business model, adjust, reduce the runway if needed, start hiring, start going after a different market if needed, a different customer base, and so on and so forth. So it's really about this adaptability that companies and investors value a lot. And then maybe one last page, if I may. So this is now the long list of topics that we asked about and that we came out. And again, like I said before, many of these things are going to feel like no-brainers, right? So there are a few things on this list that are 100% clear. Of course, you need to have a product, right? Of course, you need to have a clear story. Of course, you need to have, like I said before, a clear investor target and so on. But I think it's less about making sure that you get some of these things right and get them particularly right. But if you look at all of this, it's more about having an entire story together and making sure that you cover all of these elements and have a clear answer to those. And again, especially to the 3 topics I mentioned before, because I do think they actually make a difference. And with that, I won't bore you with any more PowerPoint slides, because I know discussion is much more interesting than PowerPoint. We also have this document available. If you want to, feel free to reach out to us. It's not a secret. We're able to share it. And now, why don't we get into the discussion?
Hi, everyone. Like said before, I'm Orlie Gruper, General Partner at Mobilitech Capital. We're super happy to support EcoMotion again this year and to see all of the ecosystem here. We invest in early stage mobility startups from pre-seed to A rounds, and we look to invest in you. We look to invest, and once we do, we're also very hands-on. We help your startup grow, and we want to know that we can bring value also to your companies. So I actually saw the full report of Kersten. And I feel like many of these things, of the percentages that were declared by investors about adaptability, about differentiation, a lot of these things, I feel it's always right. But one thing that stood out that I think is actually in another slide that you didn't present, and that matches the situation that we have today, was the two words of managed growth. So one, I would love for you to share more about that, and then maybe I'll give also my intake of what does that mean in my eyes, because I think that this is the most crucial to these days, the most crucial for startups now is managing their growth.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, the long report isn't a secret either, and I'm happy to share that as well. So it's not only Orlie who saw it, you can all see it if you want to. I think the growth angle is very important, right? Finding the right balance between hyper-growth and between what happened sort of and what was expected by investors, let's say pre-Ukraine, Russia, hyper-growth, and nobody cared about profitability, right? I think now it's changed a lot, and now what we would want to see, or what companies need to do, is share an honest perspective of what it is that they can realistically achieve in the next couple of years, or in the next year or two, with actual customers, actual leads that are out there, but at the same time also making sure that they do show a bit of growth trajectory long term. So the hockey stick is still okay in my view at least, and there needs to be a great story. But I think what needs to happen early is a believable growth. And then a second thought maybe is when we think about growth versus profitability. So I do think that profitability is very important. I do, however, think that growth is still more important than profitability. That doesn't mean that companies shouldn't strive to be profitable, but if it's a trade-off between showing high profitability margins early on and not growing as quickly, I would rather have a faster growing company that maybe is marginally profitable than the other way around. But I'm also a consultant, not an investor, so looking to see what you're saying.
Yeah, for me, managed growth means startups these days, they need to look at their runway. Every startup needs to do kind of self-check internally and see how they're spending their money. Because on one end, in these times of uncertainty, we want to know that we have enough length to run. But in the other time also, we know that we don't have enough time. And we need to make sure also that we bring on the A teams. You spoke about adaptability, but it's about humans. And we need to make sure that we bring on the A teams in order to deliver and to manage our growth also, like you said, realistically, but also to make sure that we reach those goals. I think that in the prep call, we were discussing to be able, as an entrepreneur, to be able to give the American dream, but also to really do the German process of how do I get there? What does it mean, this American dream? Take one step backwards to today and understand how you actually get there. Not just do strategy, but also things like action points of how I actually get there and how I actually close. And that brings me to the second thing. One of the things in the report showed that startups that have partnerships with Fortune 100 companies are more successful in fundraising. And I think that this is true now more than ever. I was trying to focus on what is now, right? Not just to fluff it up in investment world, but really what is now. And I see this coming back again and again from VCs that I speak to, from startups, from the industry. They need to show commercial agreements. We need to stop doing 30 POCs and start seeing how we close those POCs from a nice proof of concept to an actual commercial deal. And also in this, I'm now here to also talk to the industry, because I think the startups have proven themselves. EcoMotion is now active for 12 years, and the startups are showing that they are here. And the industry needs to show as well that they're coming with open hearts and open minds and also open pockets to this thing. And they're not going to continue, doing POCs for POCs, but actually wanting to take technology down to the production lines and showing that automotive is a good client. Because in the end, I feel like now, and you know more than I do on macroeconomics of this world, and the whole world is not in a great shape. This is why I feel a little bit more comfortable that we're in a bad shape. And I feel like when the world will go into growth again, we will be there with it and maybe lead it with our innovation. But my fear is that in this growth stage, the money, the investors, and the startups will shy away from mobility and automotive because of the reputation that is happening now and because of the type of client they are. So partnerships, commercial agreements, industry, I think now it's also the time for the industry to come more to the table. What do you think about that?
100%. I mean, we did a so-called masterclass earlier on selling into the automotive industry, right? And I think selling into the automotive industry is difficult in many ways, but also, and challenging, but also easy and comfortable in others. I think one very big difficulty is what you just said, right? They have a tendency to do POCs, right? And they like doing POCs, and they like getting stuff for free, obviously, who doesn't? But ultimately, the question is, how do you convert those, like you were saying, into a real project? And I think to convert a POC into a real project, into a real paying customer project, you obviously need patience. But at the same time, it's also about picking the quote-unquote right customer and picking the right OEM or the right tier one and making sure that they have an actual interest and then understanding their pain points. Like, is there actually an award in the pipeline? Are they actually working on a new project that is relevant? Or are they just doing POCs for the sake of doing POCs and basically getting smarter by looking at all of the interesting companies out there, because it doesn't really cost them a lot of money and they're all engineers, so they're all excited to learn new things. But I think in my view, it's really about finding these right customers, prioritizing them clearly, allocating the sales resources, the scarce sales resources to these customers, and then ultimately making sure that you understand these customers well enough in order to be able to go top down and bottom up, management level, and then also on the working level, and make sure that you can convert those deals, those POCs, into actual deals.
And the way to understand who your customer is to understand the supply chain. Many times I hear startups coming with this innovative idea of how they're going to license to this and that. Don't fuck with the supply chain. There's a supply chain in the automotive industry, and you need to know in the supply chain who is your client. Of course, always you say that you need to get the interest of the OEM to look into this, but in the end, who is the one that you're going to close your commercial deal with, and focus on that and nurture that relationship. Also, I heard a startup earlier talking about how he understood that, if he wants to land the big deals, he needs to invest in this relationship and take them out and manage all of that. And I'm like, okay, but you have these huge companies that this is what they do. They dine with politicians. They invite to the box, to the Euro Cup, whatever, all of their big clients. This is in their marketing budgets. Get on board with them. Close your partnerships with them. They already have all of that in line. And again, don't fuck with the supply chain. There is a supply chain. There is a way for you to earn in that process, and you need to understand that. And I feel like in our innovation, let's keep our innovation, the technology and the product, and not in the way that the business works in the world. No?
100%. I think it's very clear there is an OEM, there is a tier one, there are tier twos. It makes sense to go direct, and it makes sense to go via the tier one. And I think an approach that sort of covers both of these angles is probably the best one, because they will be directed by OEMs if they get really excited about technology, but ultimately they will always rather prefer to work with the tier one to make sure that the product becomes a reality, that they actually have a trusted partner that they know how to talk to. So in a previous meeting, we were talking about they need somebody to know that they can, or that they know how they need to communicate to, that they can scream at if something isn't working. And I think that's very much the concept. So they know how to work with other companies. So not I'm not going to say the F word on stage, but making sure that you respect the supply chain is in my mind a very valid point.
Respect is a better word. Sorry about that. I think you said now something interesting, and I want to reflect on that. Also, in the supply chain, there is also tier 2s and tier 3s and tier 4s, and we need to see that as well. I think one of the most interesting things that is happening in the Israeli innovation right now is the whole world of advanced materials, and they're farther down. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about, and this is also something that we were discussing as investors, like, the situation with Israel, this is growing risk, right, for investors. And we were discussing about companies that they were thinking about, like, should we set up a daughter company abroad? Should we continue in Israel? What should we do in this situation? And I think it's a very important topic for everyone to also revise, because on one hand, for me, I want to see Israeli innovation growing in Israel, but in the end, it's not a bad word to grow globally. I don't think we need to think of either or and think of the and. And actually, one of the startups in our portfolio did a very interesting thing where instead of opening a daughter company, they hired a person close to their biggest client that will be there on day-to-day managing that relationship from abroad, and they would have that feeling of having a native human that is within their ecosystem that is working as a remote extension of the company. I wanted to hear also what you feel from the ecosystem, because I know you've had a lot of discussions with all of the different startups.
So again, 100% agree, right? I think the automotive industry is very much used to having people physically on the ground. In many parts of the value chain, the physical meetings, so while virtual meetings and so on are okay these days, but the physical presence is very important, especially when you have something that eventually goes into a vehicle or is displayed on the vehicle screen and needs to be tested and tried out, right? You want somebody on the ground. And again, coming back to knowing how you work with the people, it's much easier if you have a human being that is located where you are or located close to where you are, maybe even speaks your language. That's always an added bonus. And that you can call, and that you know that if something is going wrong and if there is an issue with launching a product in a new vehicle, a software, hardware, doesn't matter what it is, a service even, that you can call and that will show up the next day or even on the same day to make sure that they can take care of the problem. I think there's another angle. If there is a demonstration element to the tech that you do and to the component or the software that you do, it makes sense to have a demonstrator in a geography where people can travel to easily. When I posted on LinkedIn that I was going to be here at EcoMotion, I received, I think, 5 calls within 2 hours of people that said, I would have liked to come as well, but unfortunately my company's travel policy doesn't allow me to fly. So it is, even though I feel very safe here, I have to admit, maybe I shouldn't, but I do feel very safe here, but there is a clear issue with some people not feeling comfortable or not being allowed to travel, and I think this will probably not go away in the next 4 weeks. So I think making this demonstrator available somewhere else is also a key success factor.
That's very true and good idea. So maybe a little bit to wrap up, I think that startups need today to look if before we had the pre-seed, seed, round A, round B, and what you brought to the table in each one of these rounds, I think that today when you think you are a pre-seed, but you need to bring to the table what a seed round would look like, what a ready POC looks like, what initial traction looks like, and not just an idea. When you're coming to a seed round, you want to show a more maturing of a closeness to a commercial deal. And in A rounds, I feel like you have to bring that commercial deal to the table because otherwise you'll just end up doing an extension.
100%. And if I think about the requirement that investors seem to have, or at least that also our clients are asking us for when we do pitch decks for them, it's really moved, right? So we're now doing much more sophisticated pitch decks for A rounds and B rounds than we used to do before, where before you could get by with a fairly simple deck, with a fairly simple estimation of the market, just sort of talking about the big picture, the big potential. I think now it needs to be much more sophisticated, which in some ways is good for us. I think it's actually also healthy for the industry, because that way the companies investors invest into are actually probably, I don't want to say more serious, but at least more real to a certain extent.
Maturing.
So, mature, yes, 100%. So I think that's it's actually a good thing. It's probably a bit more painful, but it's a good thing.
I think we are right on time. Boom. Mic drop.
Amazing.
Thank you, everyone. Has been amazing EcoMotion.
Thank you so much.